Hello, everybody. Welcome to today's episode of Pro Democracy Podcast. We have Arthur Bloom. He's a journalist, formerly of an editor at the Daily Caller and the American Conservative. Now he's the editor at Modern Age. I hope that you tell us about that website in a little bit because, frankly, I've never heard of it, but I think that our audience might be interested in knowing that. And we have Steve Poikonen, who is the host of the Slow News Day podcast. Steve was on the ground during January 6th, so he's going to be able to bring us that, perspective straight from the horse's mouth, so to speak. Arthur has written on January 6th, and I know that he's been following it closely as somebody who is in tune with DC politics and keen to subterfuge, I'd say, right?
I've got to focus, especially. I did a lot of academic research on informants and extremist groups, especially right-wing extremist groups, and a lot of the patterns that you see of these groups being just riddled with infiltrators and provocateurs are pretty consistent with what we saw on January 6th. Now, a lot of that is going to have to be speculative when we apply it to January 6th because we just don't know some of the. But I'm sure Steve could elaborate on some of the things that maybe looked a little suspicious from the ground there.
Oh, absolutely. And one of the things that I think is vital for people to know if they don't is, and I can testify to this because I got to DC on January 1st of 2021. I also organized with a group called Action for Assange. January 4th was when the extradition ruling, the original verdict was read. So we were already going to be in DC. We had events at the UK Embassy on January 3rd and then at the Department of Justice on January 4th. When we found out after announcing these events that the Stop the Steal rally was going to take place, there were a couple of us that were like, oh, yeah, we're sticking around for that. Are you kidding me? It's going to be nuts. But the meme is, the story in the mainstream news is that people were caught, the police were caught unawares, DC was caught unawares. Nobody was prepared for any of this, and that is categorically untrue. We were there the entire week. Everyone we spoke to knew that there were going to be upwards of 250,000 people marching in Washington, D.C. on January 6th. Hotel owners or hotel management did. Airbnb got sent out an email to the host saying if people look like they're going to be there for the Trump thing, maybe you shouldn't rent to them. We had to check out of our Airbnb on the 5th from the Action for Assange thing. So I spent the whole day trying to convince Airbnb hosts that even though I look like me, I'm not actually there to go set off the boogaloo. And finally I did. It was able to do that. But on January 4th, we were across the street from the Capitol at the Rayburn Building, where Congresswoman AOC bravely sacrificed herself for the Republic. So let's all take a moment of silence for that. Bless you, Sandy.
Actually, I have a candle that I was hoping
you
would join me in lighting.
Yeah. I plan on planting a red fern as soon as possible. But we were in front of that building, and there were maybe 55 of us. There were 3 cops to every one of us in a horseshoe with one exit that was blocked by a paddy wagon. Now, the Capitol Police were told to stand down, spread out, thin out. There were 2 fake pipe bomb threats that were called in, that they had the person on camera rolling up a suitcase to in front of the RNC and the DNC well ahead of when that threat was called in. There were multiple jurisdictions that had access to that video footage in front of the headquarters of the 2 main political parties in the country. They chose not to investigate and wait for a threat to be called in, even though there was incredibly suspicious behavior that took place. We can get into Ray Epps. We can get into all of the people that are associated with him.
John Sullivan.
We could talk about John Sullivan. My colleagues at the Convo Couch interviewed him at a Black Lives Matter thing in Portland like 6 months before. Have him on tape, and he was there as a BLM activist. And then when he was at Stop the Steal, he was there as somewhere in between Trump supporter and Nick Fuente's hype man. I'm not sure where it landed.
Yeah, John Sullivan's footage is really a sight to watch. I highly recommend everybody just watching the full 45 minutes of it. It's you really learn a lot, and there are these multiple moments of what is almost striking watching his videos. This is maybe a little bit of a controversial thing to say, but it's how peaceful everything is. By and large, everybody is like obeying the police. They're stopping when they were told to stop, things like that.
Filtering in single file.
Right. Yeah. And as somebody pointed out on Twitter, they were obeying the velvet ropes in the statuary hall. That's not something, you typically see in an insurrection. And then he obviously had the best footage of Ashley Babbitt getting shot. Though he doesn't actually show, or his footage doesn't actually show her getting hit. It pans over just right after that. I could get a little conspiratorial about Ashley Babbitt, to be perfectly honest with you. I think there are a number of things that are kind of strange about it. We don't know anything about the custody of her body from the moment that it leaves the Capitol to the moment that she shows up as ashes in a Gateway Pundit video. The entire Ashley Babbitt scene was being kind of stage managed by a writer for the Gateway Pundit named Taylor Hanson. And Hanson was the one who, he was in that corridor when it happened. And then he was the one who got access to her memorial service where they scattered her ashes. We don't know who cremated her, on whose orders, where it was done, anything like that. There's just we know astonishingly little about a violent death in the seat of American government. And that's really very strange. It's one of my lingering questions about January 6th. If this doesn't sound too crazy, I mean, you sort of wonder, did she actually die? Because she shows up as ashes. There's no body. First of all, there are a couple of interesting firsts with cremation. Brian Sicknick, the officer, it's the first time cremated remains have ever lain in state in the Capitol. It's kind of a first. I find that a little bit interesting. But anyway, the Ashley Babbitt thing is extremely strange. The way that her PR and the way her media was managed, and combined with how little we know about the custody of her body and things like that after the shooting, is really very strange.
Well, so to that point, strange as it may be, what the Capitol Police got out of it was what, a couple $100 million in branch offices in New York and Los Angeles. If there was a way to exploit or take a weird, kind of, I guess, conspiratorial angle, if the narrative is she was a violent insurrectionist who was trying to overthrow the government on behalf of, the actual sitting president that day, however that works out in the heads of the people who spun this narrative, then what's the counter narrative? Like, is she a sigil for recruitment for the FBI / Oath Keepers, or 3%ers or Proud Boys, or whichever group the FBI has set up shop in now? I mean, is that it, or I'm just trying, because I'm not discounting anything that you're saying. I'm just trying to see where it fits in terms of narrative or counter narrative.
Well, the thing that stands out to me, I guess, about Ashley Babbitt, when you watch John Sullivan's video, the moment that the shoot happens, it has an immediate effect on the crowd. Everybody calms down immediately, and word spreads very, very quickly throughout the crowd, and it gets back even outside the Capitol very quickly. They shot this girl. They shot this girl. And it has like a sort of, I would say that's when the riot ended, was when Ashley Babbitt was shot, very, very, very directly. It almost it seems like a crowd management technique or something like that. You know, all of a sudden there's a death. All of a sudden this is no longer fun and games. Someone has been shot. I think that sort of had its intended effect, or that's what it seems like to me.
Well, okay. I think that the real controversy is right in front of our eyes. I mean, and I'm not discrediting or attempting to discredit anything that you guys have said, but the real controversy is that since 2014, we have learned that it is not appropriate for officers to use lethal force unless they themselves or somebody else is at threat of receiving lethal force from the person they're using it against. And we can see on camera that that was not the case. She had no weapons on her. She was trying to climb through a window. Trespassing is not an executionable offense, right? So I think that's the real controversy, and the response by the media and the left to that very basic fact, just totally ignoring it, is, I mean, it's a massive scandal, and it shows the hypocrisy of the left on full display. You know, do you guys remember Maria Butina? She was the Russian. Yeah. She was the Russian girl who was accused of acting as an unregistered foreign agent and convicted of that. I went to all of her court appearances. Basically, this is like she didn't fill out paperwork that she needed to. That was like the extent of her crime, right? Well, she was never accused of spying. The media ubiquitously accused her of being a spy for Russia. That's what I'm reminded of here, because only on steroids, because here we have a situation where we have 700 people. None of them are accused by the criminal justice system of being insurrectionists. And yet the media ubiquitously calls them insurrectionists. So it's a massive failure. It's not a failure. I shouldn't call it a failure because it's intentional, right? It's entirely intentional. And Tucker Carlson last night I actually commend him for calling Ted Cruz out, one of the most powerful Republicans in the U.S., out on calling them terrorists, because they're not accused of terrorism. They're not charged with terrorism. They're what I don't know what kind of crimes they're charged with: trespassing, unlawful carrying of a selfie stick. You know, it's so. I think that this whole look. If January 6th didn't happen, there'd be a different January 6th, right? There'd be something else that coincides with the pandemic that gives the Democrats the excuse. It'd be more Russia, right?
Okay. So to that point, do you remember in 2020 that we were getting hit with memo after memo from the Department of Homeland Security saying that there was an impending cyber attack that was going to take place? It was going to threaten the integrity of the election, and it was going to be Russian and Iranian hackers out of via Venezuela. That's what the CIA, that's what the DHS was telling it for months and months and months.
That's like every other week.
It's what they were trying to prime the pump with. So that was waiting there. But so was Cory Bush's legislation for sweeping domestic terror legislation. That
Cory
was
Bush,
yeah, who had not even been sworn into office yet. I think the day or 2 days after, Arthur, you may have it better than me, but there was a bill introduced that was broad domestic terrorism legislation, and Cory Bush's name was on it. She hadn't even been sworn in yet, but they were, at least online, they were heralding her as the author of this legislation.
Yeah.
I can't help but think, and I think other people have pointed this out as well, is like with the decline of the the Islamic terrorist specter. You know, you kind of need a new sort of thing. And I think, you know, Alex, you were talking about how the left has totally failed in this regard. It's funny because, like, we've talked about things like Syria or China, and they're still kind of stuck on this Islamophobia kick.
Paradigm.
Yeah, exactly. Even though it's sort of waned to a large extent, and now that sort of specter is being replaced with this like domestic right-wing terrorist. And so it's I mean, I'm not in the US, but it really does look like it's like, you know, the next wave of war on terror, Patriot Act sort of thing.
Yeah, the chickens are coming home to roost, and this Ted Cruz thing really, I think, sheds light on that. I mean, Ted Cruz has been calling things terrorism that probably aren't really terrorism for a very long time, and now that kind of label, that that designation is increasingly being applied to his own supporters, his own voters, and it's pretty scary. And I think, you know, I've talked to my previous job, I used to have to talk to Republicans all the time, Republican politicians. We would have them on the show, and getting them to have second thoughts about kind of the terrorism industrial complex is very difficult. They thinking a new, they're very scared to think in a new way about this sort of thing, and so I don't even think Ted Cruz even, you know, thought twice about calling it a terrorist attack. Of course, it's a terrorist attack, and so he throws it out there, and all of a sudden, all of these right wingers across the country are like, "Wait a minute."
Yeah.
You know, I just don't think he was expecting the backlash, and he's been on this apology tour for the last 24 hours. Well,
after getting humiliated by Tucker Carlson and being called a liar in that like 40 seconds on Fox News than any other panel or, you know, show host has ever had the temerity to bring to him, in a way that Tucker did it as someone who has, you know, vocally supported Ted Cruz before.
Yeah,
that had to, you know.
Well, and I was also going to say, you know, Ted Cruz has referred to January 6th as a terrorist attack consistently. Other people pointed this out. Even right after it happened, he used that phrasing. And the reason why it matters is once you use the word terrorism, it opens up all sorts of cans of resources you can use to deal with a problem. It opens up all sorts of tactics become justifiable once you use that language. And
they could, I mean, they could drone strike them, right? I mean, they're enemy combatants. They're you know,
indefinite.
I mean, that's what, and it wouldn't be the first time that they did a drone strike on an American citizen because of the terrorism charge. But go ahead, Arthur. I'm sorry.
Well, you're right. We live under a government that has claimed the authority to extrajudicially kill an American citizen without a trial. And so there is no restraint other than what they think they can get away with. Now, does that mean we're likely to see Trump supporters getting drone struck? I don't know. I kind of doubt it.
No.
But the only thing that's keeping that from happening is because they think it would backfire. It's not because they recognize any kind of legal constraint there, because there isn't any anymore.
Well, I mean, the move bombing kind of proves that.
Yeah, I mean, that's a good point, but I think that in this age of information, social media and 24-hour news, it'd be a little bit, and you know, I think that it'd be harder. Well, maybe not, but I was gonna say I think it'd be harder to justify it against what the media calls white supremacists than it was then to justify it against black nationalists. But I actually, you know, this is the interesting thing, because once you paint them as uniformly white nationalists, neo-Nazis, what have you, and there was like one guy there with some kind of Nazi shirt on, but overall I've heard from the January 6th crowd them comparing the authoritarian crackdown against them to Nazism, So, which, obviously that's not a favorable comparison. It seems like overall they're not white supremacist neo-Nazis. So I was wondering, Jordan, if you could talk about the, because I know that you have a history on this subject. Talk about the infiltration of actual, far right KKK style groups by the federal authorities, and what you said at the very beginning that a lot of this reminds you of that. So I was wondering if you could elaborate on that.
Sure. Yeah, I'd be happy to. The amount of mischief that a far right informant can cause is pretty limitless, and you can go back as far as the history of Nazism exists. Adolf Hitler was an army intelligence informant who was sent into the German Workers' Party to gather, and he was an informant sent into a far right group to gather intelligence on them. He caused quite a lot of mischief thereafter. The history of American far right groups is pretty similar, and you can look at almost the leadership of almost every far right group that you can find is just riddled with, or even consists of, informants. George Lincoln Rockwell, the founder of American neo-Nazism, used to regularly phone the ADL's man in Washington to let him know what he was up to. The leader of American neo-Nazism was an informant.
For the ADL.
For the ADL. You could go into more recent days. Richard Spencer outed one of his donors on a live stream. He's also been a big source for Luke O'Brien's reporting at the Huffington Post. They're playing an interesting little game of telephone that they think they're so coy and smart with Luke and Richard there. But Richard's an informant.
Enrique Tarrio.
And the one thing that's also consistent over the history of this sort of thing is that the informants make matters worse. An informant has, I think a lot of people sort of have a stereotype in their head when we talk about informants in far right groups. They think about the movie Black Klansman, the Spike Lee movie. Have you guys seen that? It's a good movie, but it's a pretty cut and dried story of a cop who pretends to be a Klansman to disrupt the Klan. It's a story.
We ought to look at the Fred Hampton movie that's shot from the perspective of the FBI snitch. If they
that's a good movie too. Yeah, so the Black Klansman is a very clear moral stakes. There's the good guys and the bad guys, but very often these informant relationships are morally a whole lot more murky than that. People become informants for all sorts of complicated reasons. Sometimes they're under pressure. But very often not. Very often they just like to be seen as brokers of information. One guy that I spent a long time researching, a fellow by the name of Roy Frankhauser, he was the Grand Dragon of the Pennsylvania Klan. He had a decades-long career on the far right, and he was an informant the entire time. He got his start in the American Nazi Party. He took a trip from Reading, Pennsylvania, down to Arlington, Virginia, where I live, to the headquarters of the American Nazi Party, goes back to Reading and walks into the FBI office that Monday morning and spills his guts. And he did that for decades. And there's no reason to expect that the Proud Boys or the Oath Keepers are really any different. The one wrinkle, though, so the Proud Boys, especially, we've got Enrique Tarrio. I think there was one other that was actually identified as an informant. The Oath Keepers are an interesting one because the Oath Keepers are explicitly, and it's almost a component of their advertising, that they're comprised of former military and law enforcement. They don't downplay, and in fact they emphasize their connection with law enforcement and the military. And you look at the way they show up at all sorts of protests claiming to be providing security, and their record is there hasn't been an instance of things getting out of hand, like somebody getting shot because of an Oath Keeper security detail, having an itchy trigger finger or something like that. That hasn't happened. They seem to be fairly disciplined. But I sort of wonder if the entire Oath Keepers are just sort of a brown shirt kind of construct of I don't know, spooks, I guess. Anyway, so that's sort of the history. I mean, I could pull out example after example of these sorts of far right informants, but I don't want to belabor the point.
Well, I'll tell you with the Oath Keepers, you know, when I was in Charlottesville, they were very composed, and actually, with all the violence going on, having some guys there with actual, you know, trigger discipline, it wasn't discomforting compared to the you know, chaotic brawls that were going on and the indiscriminate use of violence from both sides. But yeah, I mean, so I wonder if we could talk about a little more from Steve's perspective about like suspicious things that were going on, because I saw like one video where, you know, I mean, this guy comes up to the police and they look like freaking stormtroopers. And he's saying, like, they're going in. Where's your backup? Stop this. And the cop's just like, you know, he just, I don't know, man. So there was a lot of stuff like that. But I am going to end the Twitter live stream and move exclusively over to Rockfin. I hope that if you're watching on Twitter, you come join us on Rockfin. We have more to come. Steve?
So the vibe in the morning was kind of like lame, mellow, sort of day drunk music festival. There was, you know, I mean, it was, I'm not kidding. I'm not. So when we got there, the first thing we noticed right off the way is they were running signal jammers. We couldn't live stream. So we were sort of, you know, making eye contact with other content creators and whatnot. And we were trying to shoot little segments. There was right before like the human cattle gate into the ellipse where everybody was would gather for the speeches. A massive backpack pile like at every protest, but because it was the Stop the Steal event, and for a lot of people it was their first day, they were marveling at how there could be a pile of backpacks so peacefully, and it must not be that way at the left-wing protests. It was hilarious. I'm standing there with Jason Burmis and Dylan Avery, and we're talking to a very hammered, very sweet woman from Tennessee who drove up because she had been told that this was going to be a white supremacist rally of violent extremists. And she was like, I don't believe that, but I'm going to go see for myself. And there was a lot of that going there. There were a lot of people who bought the marketing. This is the thing that people really need to understand about January 6th and why there's no way in hell anyone can ever refer to it as an insurrection is because it is the marketing coming to a head. That's why those people stayed in the velvet robes. They were patriots. They loved their country. They believed in their constitution. They thought that an election had been illegally ran, and they wanted to assemble publicly to express their constitutional rights and demand some sort of recompense. And that's what they thought they were going for. Now, that's not to say that there weren't agitators. It's not to say there weren't shitbirds. I did walk past a dude who was like, I'm just here for the boogaloo, you know. But, I mean, he was unarmed.
Well, I mean, like, if you think that's bad, go to a BLM protest. I'm sorry. It's like 75% white anarchists looking for ultra violence. So, you know.
Yes, the night before, just a couple of blocks away from the Capitol, in a little square, I can't remember what the name of the square is, but they had like a no man's land and then a wall of cops on both sides, and then Antifa yelling at the Proud Boys and the Proud Boys yelling at Antifa, and everybody had their costumes on and everybody knew, you know, according to which side the good guys were and the bad guys were. You know, it was all like very pro wrestling atmosphere to it. And it just I kept waiting for someone to walk out and go, okay, cut, we got it.
Well, I think Kantbot had a really funny tweet about once it all went down. I mean, instead of forming a provisional government and issuing arrest warrants for congressmen, like you might see in a proper insurrection. They were all just sort of milling around the Capitol waiting for the level to end, as if it's sort of a video game or something like that.
It's funny because I was like, are these Democratic politicians really going to act like they don't know what a coup looks like, as if they haven't orchestrated a bunch of fraud? Like, look at the actual ones that you put forth. I've seen people compare it to that. Like, I've seen so many posts comparing, like, oh, now the U.S. has to invade the U.S. because, like, there's no more countries to invade, as if this is even of remotely the same magnitude as what they've done abroad. It's absolute insanity.
Well, but they want the same measures. They want the same counterinsurgency measures. I'm sorry. That's my whole point. Like, this is empire coming home. Arthur, I think you said it. It's all coming home to roost now. This is the direct result of what we are doing as an empire. They all turn in on their own citizenry. And I don't know how to explain it more clearly to the people who aren't intentionally seeing it, especially the lefties that you mentioned, Alex, that are all ACAB all day until Ashley Babbitt gets murdered, and then they're like, she deserved it, that bitch burned in hell, and it's just there's no connection there. It's wild.
Yeah, I mean, I even saw DC Antifa holding, like, counter protests to the vigils for the 700 or so arrested January 6th protesters. So, they're basically doing the job of the Capitol Police while saying ACAB. But, really quick, if you want to see what a real insurrection looks like, look at Kazakhstan today. Look at what Debbie Wasserman Schultz tweeted yesterday about the provisional government, so-called, of Venezuela, where, former U.S. Special Forces, what was it, last year or 2 years ago, entered the country on speedboats with 320 M4 carbines, rocket launcher, high-tech night vision goggles to overthrow the democratically elected government there in support of a government which has, by the way, collapsed. I mean, a fake government which has collapsed internally with a lot of defectors because of the sheer amount of corruption. And only has support from the United States. That's its only claim to legitimacy. Look at Ukraine. I mean, look at what happened in Ukraine, where actual neo-Nazis and neo-Confederates, yes, neo-Confederates in Ukraine, as shocking as it sounds, if you look at their takeovers of government buildings, they were hanging Confederate flags. I don't know why Ukrainians would have any kind of affinity with the plight of the South during the Civil War. It doesn't make any sense to me, but isn't that
the Russian naval ensign that you're talking about? Like, there's the Russian naval ensign looks like the Confederate flag, and that's why they fly it in the Donbass.
I didn't see it in the Donbass. No, I didn't see it in the Donbass. I'm talking about there's. I can pull up a picture if you give me a second. They took over a government building in Kiev.
Yeah, I've got a buddy who's a photojournalist in the Donbass, and I haven't seen any Confederate flags coming out of his work. I don't think he would intentionally gloss over that shit either. He's not the type of dude for it.
Here we go.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah.
Look at that. Okay.
And actually, I tweeted this January 6th when the far right storms government buildings where DC wants a coup. Democrats call them pro-democracy protesters, even if they hang Confederate flags. Biden cheered them in Ukraine and honored some at an NED event called "From Protest to Politics," honoring Ukraine's new Democrats.
Yeah, I mean that.
So
cross
there you have it. Tweeted
nicer.
1 year and 1 day ago today. Right, but I mean that's the Mila. You couldn't be more accurate. Where if the Democrats support these kinds of worse people, in foreign countries, as basically shock troops, call them pro-democracy protesters. I'm supposed to believe that like these people on January 6th, just because they have a big beard, are more anti-American than Jaish al-Islam, So I mean, I wonder.
We're certainly less observant.
Right.
Well, it's not even about
Mila,
being
as somebody who's not from. Go ahead. I was
No,
gonna say, as somebody who's not from the United States, like, what's your view on the demonization that you're seeing?
So I have to say, I was in school. I'm still a student for those who don't know, but I was in class while the riots were happening, and everyone was like, "Oh my God!" And I went to class the next day, and it was my Canadian constitutional law class, so not like has nothing to do with the U.S. And like half the class was just like people talking about this whole thing, and like as if it had anything to do with Canadian constitutional law. And like I remember my professor, like, who was very sweet, whatever, like God bless her, but like, being like kept emphasizing like this is this like revolt of like angry white supremacist men and whatever. And so I got into it with her because I was like, really, because I saw like flags from like places like I saw like MEK there, or like far right Cubans, or like it doesn't seem to just be like a white American thing. But even that besides the point, like I was just kind of like, it just seems like even liberals in Canada have kind of bought into the Democrat narrative, and it's like everyone's a Democrat now. They've bought into that narrative in order to justify this very like academic worldview as well, this like internationally academic worldview that like the biggest threat is the far right white supremacists, when, as I've said before, this is just the new Islamic terrorists. These aren't the people with like the actual power in the US.
The family that when we parked and walked up to the ellipse, the family that I was walking up with was a very large, in all manners of description, Mexican family from Northern California. And they were patriots. They were MAGA as fuck, dude. They were there, for the reasons that I was running through earlier. Like they legitimately thought that they could freely assemble to express their constitutional rights to, air a grievance with their government. And like that's what they were there to do. They planned their kids' like Christmas break around it. They were really bummed out that most of tourism in DC was destroyed because of the pandemic. They couldn't do like half of the stuff they wanted to do, but they were trying to make the best of it. And like that's what they were there for. And you can't discount that. First of all, you can't discount that sentiment exists across the spectrum. Politically, you can't discount that there are people who don't look like they fit the particular description that are going to share those sentiments, because again, this is people responding to marketing and propaganda largely. And so the fact that corporate press has deliberately ran away from that, and then like all of the little like independent media ass barnacles that just serve to carry forward the message of the corporate press into the rest of the interwebs, they have completely chosen to ignore that part of it. And like this, yes, there were shitbirds there. There were also 200,000 human beings who were not there to do violence, that saw some wild psyop go down in front of them, and they're probably still trying to figure out how to process it, including 700 political prisoners? That's crazy.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that's what it comes down to for me. I don't have any particular brief for Trump the man, but your average Trump supporter, I kind of like him. I think they're basically good people, and I think they've been so badly misled. And when it comes to January 6th, the fact that we didn't see Trump raising money for their legal defense, I think is totally shameful. If you're going to hype this Stop the Steal stuff, if you're going to set those expectations, if you're going to tell the country that the election was stolen and you want people to do something about it, you should help them when they do. And it's that I think there's just sort of a basic issue of credibility of a political movement going on there. And then also some of these other guys in specific on January 6th, like Ali Akbar, he was the main organizer of the protest. And he's an interesting one. Gosh, you sort of wonder if he might be an informant. The fact that he hasn't been charged with anything just yet.
You're generous.
I don't want to make any unsubstantiated claims here, but I think there are reasons to suspect he might have been an informant. And then he just completely dropped off the face of the earth for the next 9 months after it all happened. And so these people are telling basically decent Trump voters to do something that has high risks and then leaving them high and dry when bad things happen. That just strikes me as very, very sad.
Well, yeah. I think what it confirmed to me is Trump doesn't really have an ideology. He's just a narcissist and wants people to do things in his favor. But I don't think he has any ideological commitments, which is also why I've pushed back against the liberal narrative that he's some white supremacist, because I don't think he cares. I think he just wants people to worship him, and so this is more revelatory of that than anything. And yeah, that's
Trump does this ridiculous thing where he's the deep state is against me. They've been running this country for years. They've gotten us into all of these disastrous forever wars. They're sick people, and then he builds his administration and he's we get half populist and half deep state people. And I'm going to listen to both sides. I'm going to, we're going to have a balance that way. And then even afterwards, he just did that interview. What was it with Candace Owen about Julian Assange? And, she asked him why he didn't pardon him. And he's like, well, there were people on both sides of the debate. And I'll tell you, one side had, a lot of really bad people. I mean, this is a paraphrase, but it was obvious he was saying that the deep state people wanted him to not pardon Julian Assange and that the deep state people are bad. And it's so why didn't you? That's not an answer.
Right. Yeah, the Trump administration was to populism how pornography is to sex. It basically fake. You get a frisson of pleasure from it, but it's hollow, and there's no follow through.
And then look at the Secretary of State right now
your own masturbatory purposes.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah. And look at his Secretary of State, who, Jordan, I'm sorry, Arthur, I want to know what your view on this is, because this is actually something we've kind of debated here, is whether Pompeo might run against Trump in the primary.
Well, as far as I can tell, Mike Pompeo is running in a primary of one, and that one is Sheldon Adelson's widow. He's looking for that fat check, but I don't think he has any constituency. I guess the question of whether Trump is going to run in 2020, it's the most fashionable parlor game in DC right now. But I kind of think he won't do it, but he's just going to drag it out as long as possible because he wants to kind of maintain that control over the narrative and things like that. But will he actually pull the trigger? I'm not sure.
Well, this is something that's consistent throughout Donald Trump's history that also ties in everything you were saying about the lack of support for the political prisoners, for the people who have been hemmed up by this. Donald Trump's legacy is built on him pitching a product, undercutting everyone in the process, screwing over all of the builders, and then bouncing and throwing lawyers at it later if it comes to it. And that's just how he rolls. Historically, that's how his business operates. That's how his family life operates. That's who the guy is. It's one of the reasons that he made such a wonderful WWE villain, which is why they put Donald Trump in the WWE Hall of Fame before he was elected president. And people thought that an individual with all those movie credits, the reality TV host who's in the WWE Hall of Fame for being the villain was going to somehow be a servant of the people. That guy, by the way, printed $20 trillion in 2020 alone. That guy was a real estate settlement broker for Benjamin Netanyahu. They had a neighborhood named after him in the Golan Heights. That guy was a vaccine salesman. He passed the largest 2 mobile upward transfers of wealth in recorded human history. That is bringing more socialism to the shores of the United States than Roosevelt. And I dare anyone to challenge me on that.
I think you're probably right about that.
Yeah, I mean, I'm really interested in the future direction of, the Republican Party, because like, what happens if Trump doesn't run? Does it go to Pompeo? Does it go to Ron DeSantis, who is also, very pro-Israel?
And a Gitmo guard.
I'm sorry?
He was a former Guantanamo Bay guard.
Is that right? I didn't know that.
I don't think DeSantis has what it takes. This is a pretty unfashionable opinion for a conservative, but I don't think DeSantis has what it takes.
He's got Florida charisma, but he can't appeal nationally. And honestly, this is harsh to say, but he's too greasy for the Midwest Christian conservative.
That's more strongly than I would have put it, but yes.
I operate on cynicism and caffeine and just enough cannabis to keep it in check, my friend. I do.
But it just seems to me this party, they're unable to shake the neocon as much as they try. Like with Trump, there was kind of a flirtation with shaking the neocon off, but then you have people like Pompeo and Bolton who are very involved in that administration. You have the whole Israel thing. Like the only person who I thought, oh, this might shake the neocon off, is someone like Ron Paul, but I don't think that libertarianism is in anymore either because of the populism angle.
Well, there's a couple of different schools on that, and if anybody was going to step up and claim that mantle, it would probably be Thomas Massey, but I don't know if I don't think he's got a broad enough coalition of support for that in the moment. I do think that like the paleo libertarian segment, though, especially where it's been more or less driven by Scott Horton, they've been making massive inroads in at least opening people's eyes on the right to the real cost of American empire, and are doing, I don't know, at least decent work in undercutting the neocon narrative. The debate that Horton had with Bill Kristol should be like required viewing for every freshman college student in any sort of government class.
Yeah, that was wonderful. And I've also noticed Tho Bishop from the Mises Institute has been making real strides too. I love those guys. Those are the kinds of libertarians that I really like. It's the kind of Cato Institute, like DC libertarians that I don't have a whole lot of time for. They're just sort of
I don't think anybody has any time.
Corporate shills or something like that. No,
I did write for the Cato Institute once, but I'm not ideologically aligned. It was a friendly debate. I'll put it that way.
Well, what I'd kind of like to see is some kind of real populism, kind of like what you were saying, Steve, with the incredible upward transfer of wealth with COVID. There's not a whole lot of the middle class left, and the middle class is the social base of the Republican Party. What do you do when it disappears? What does the party look like? That's sort of the deeper question. And where do the politicians come from in a country where the middle class is no longer large and stable? And what do they say? I think, Josh Hawley is kind of grasping at an answer. He's an interesting one. I think he's maybe not broken with the past quite as much as we might like. He's the one that I'm watching for 2024. I mean, I would say he's kind of gotten like this mid-century American radio host patois, this way of speaking. I kind of like it. It seems retro to me. Is it a little too strange to play in a national presidential election? I don't know. But I'd like to see a conservatism that takes on the banks. They are the exploiters of the people. Let's put usury back on the right-wing agenda, like doing something about usury. That's sort of like so much about like modern right-wing politics you can just find in the poetry of Ezra Pound. You could just like read the cantos and see what right-wing politics of the future is going to look like. But no, I kind of think the neocons are like reconstituting themselves, and one
as
thing
Hillary Clinton Democrats, yes.
Well, yeah, some of them are actually just going back to where they came from, and that's what the Bulwark crowd is kind of doing. But I kind of think that this kind of new, I make fun of it a lot, but we've seen in the last year or two that all these conservatives there's this macho posturing. We've got to get tough. We've got to talk like we're badasses, and like this kind of thing. The macho posturing. It's become very, very prevalent on the right. And what is this about? In my more conspiratorial moments, I wonder, is this about sort of preparing the ground for war with China? And you guys know Bronze Age pervert, right?
Yeah.
So he's a neocon psyop. He is 100% a neocon psyop. His dissertation advisor at Yale is an East Coast Straussian, Stephen Smith. And so he is deeply ensconced in like the neocon opinion making machine. His one of his mentors was David Sidorsky, who's on the board of the Jewish Institute for National Security Affairs. So he's and this is a guy who's like posing as like Putinist right-wing bodybuilder kind of guy. He's a neocon. I think this is very interesting. There are these sorts of things, and the thing that just came out a week or so ago, Jack Murphy. I wonder if there's some sort of, he kind of exploded, but I wonder if his liminal order is some sort of intelligence operation. They were using Wicker. Wicker is a chat app that has some serious security concerns. It was funded in part by Thor Halvorson, who I'm sure you are well aware of.
Yeah, he's the founder of the Human Rights Foundation, and he hosts the annual summit that is basically like a boot camp for regime change activists. He's also related to Leopoldo Lopez, who is the mentor of Juan Guaido and a violent terrorist, actual terrorist.
Right. So what does it tell you that there's this group of like masculinist secret society kind of thing that's using Wicker as their communications tool? A few people since I was speaking publicly about this have come out of the woodwork and told me about their experiences in the liminal order. One of them, I have no way of confirming this or knowing if it's true. But he said that there was some sort of overlay on their Wicker platform that caused all of their communications to be collected. And that does not surprise me in the least. And the potential really, with any right wing, these guys are not, I wouldn't describe them as far right, but if you join a group that can render you unemployable for being a member of it, you are instantly blackmailable. And that's the case. That's why every far right group is a blackmail ring. If you can lose your job for joining it, you can be blackmailed.
Yeah.
And I wonder if the liminal order has an aspect of that to it. And so these are, there are deep state operations all over the political right, or things that kind of I suspect of being that, or kind of smell a little bit like that. The two big serious, like heavy duty neo-Nazi groups of the Trump years both have aspects to them that raise questions with regard to informants and stuff. Atomwaffen and the base. Atomwaffen, of course, has been linked to a number of murders. A few of their members murdered people. I shouldn't say linked to. They did it. The publisher, Atomwaffen's main publisher, was bankrolled by the FBI. And that's now come out, and so the way a lot of these groups, I think, they draw in young and impressionable men and get them to do crazy things. That's what the purpose of a lot of these things is. And the same thing is true for the base. The base is another one of these hardcore neo-Nazi groups and I'm not kind of out on a limb on this. Jason Wilson at The Guardian started to have suspicions about this group. The leader of it was a former government employee who fled to Russia. So both of the heavy-duty new neo-Nazi groups of the Trump years kind of smell a little bit like intelligence operations.
Yeah. I mean, it's hardly surprising. I did want to comment on, because you mentioned Josh Hawley, and it seems like the populist right has kind of a weak spot where, on one hand, they're against confrontation with Russia, but they seem to be very pro confrontation with China. And I'm not going to pretend that China is like some, utopia. I'm not that kind of person, but and there may be I would think that if I were a populist, I would want to promote a mutually beneficial trade relationship, other kinds of relationship with China, not necessarily view it as necessarily the strategic enemy, right? But Tucker has that. Hawley has that. One thing that Tucker has that Hawley doesn't is that he's kind of culturally liberal, right? Tucker, in that, Hawley has this history of working with organizations that campaign against things like gay marriage, right? And I think that's where Trump found some of his success, is that he somehow was able to claim that he was a conservative, but he didn't have that stigma of the gay marriage issue, where I think that, I don't know any gay Republicans. I'm sure you probably do, but is that a big issue for them?
Well, I think one phrase that's relevant to this is I think it was Matt Walther that coined the phrase "barstool conservatives," conservatives of the kind that listen to Barstool Sports or follow their podcasts or whatever. People that are not especially socially conservative, that are just they just don't like the left, and there are a lot of these people. And I think that you've hit on something that is very real, very real with the Trump. Trump did not evince any kind of particular affinity for social conservative causes. There was just on abortion this sort of strategic alliance, and we heard endlessly from the sort of the trendier or more fashionable evangelicals about how this was going to be morally compromising, that it was morally compromising for the pro-life movement to make this strategic alliance with Trump. I think that was overstated. It remains to be seen. If the Supreme Court strikes down Roe v. Wade, that alliance will have paid off in spades. It will have been entirely worth, allying with the philandering con man. If you get what you want, politics isn't about whether a person's like a good, whether a politician is a good person. It's about whether you can get what you want from them. And I think conservatives for a long time have kind of focused on the politics of like symbolism instead of the politics of dollars and cents and, what is this person going to do for me? I think the pro-life movement had to kind of grow up and get a little bit realistic when they made that strategic alliance with Trump. And I don't think it's morally compromising, but there are a lot of people who do.
Well, I think with politics in general, if you are in it for moral purity, it's not like you're still deluding yourself. There was I remember one of when I used to take political science, and I had and I read Machiavelli, and one of his points was if you're in this for morality, it's kind of get out of the kitchen, you can't stand the heat, and I do think that's the case. You're not like, get involved with a charity or like a church or something if that's what you're trying to do, you know.
Somebody should tell AOC.
Where we're going,
I've tried.
Where we're going, we don't need morality.
Any thoughts, Steve?
You know, I'm trying to like still keep it all in the frame of January 6th here for just
yeah, good point.
Well, no, because in real time right now, and my phone's kind of blowing up, like the Supreme Court is basically dehumanizing the population and comparing all of us to bits of machinery. That is sort of troublesome. But there's I don't know, this, I'm gonna keep coming back to like the way that the marketing made a lot of this possible, because I do genuinely believe that the expectation for what was going to happen that day was much, much, much greater than what ultimately happened that day. And I think that because we've so thoroughly and overly propagandized our population, that in and of itself is what stopped a full-scale riot from happening. Because while Donald Trump was still speaking, that's when all of the barricades were being removed. That's when all of the fencing was being cut down and rolled away, and the no admittance signs hidden, so that when Donald Trump pointed over to the the Capitol, and said, "You're going to march that way, blah, 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 you know, get your country back," or whatever. And that's what liberals jumped on as like the signal to overthrow the government or some garbage. The people who walked up and were funneled, no matter which way they went, they were funneled to walk to the one point where the barricades, the no admittance signs, and the fencing had been removed. So it was clearly orchestrated for,
in other words, they were let in, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. Well, and they weren't let in, you know, by the Capitol Police, except for the Capitol Police that were on camera waving them in. But I mean, in terms of like where the barricades were, and how would they know? Because if they had been, you know, occasional or one-time tourists to Washington, D.C., chances are they were allowed to walk up, you know, basically onto the steps of the Capitol, or if not onto the steps of the Capitol at any given point that they'd ever been to Washington, D.C. prior to that. It wouldn't seem out of the ordinary to a casual tourist, is the point that I'm trying to make, is that they could walk as far as they could. So that when people were up on the Cap, as it's being directed, as the crowd is literally being directed by megaphone from the guy on the scaffolding tower. And he's literally screaming into the megaphone, "Go forward, go forward, go forward." Interrupt somebody trying to give like a weepy patriotic speech to be like, all they need to know right now is to get in. For all of that to happen, there's operational permission that goes way above the pay grade of the Capitol Police. It goes way above the pay grade of Jim Jordan or anybody else who's getting screamed at by that committee. The politics, and this is kind of, I guess, universal, but politics is happening way downstream from the decision-making level, from the operational level. And politics is what we get to see. These are people in positions of perceived power that have influence and leverage within their immediate spheres. But the power is perceived, and it's the show we get to see, so that we still fight with each other, so that we don't like each other, so that we don't come together as, you know, human beings and actually decide what kind of government we want, because the oligarchy that we have is making all of the decisions, and I'm pretty fucking sick of it. I don't know about you.
Yeah, and I think the Republican Party made a huge mistake in deciding not to cooperate with the January 6th committee. Some of these questions that we're hashing through right now about, you know, that guy at the top of the tower, like you just mentioned, Revolver News has suggested that he was some sort of Fed. If there were actual Republicans on the committee, they could be asking questions about this sort of thing. There was a field report from the Norfolk FBI office that bespoke some sort of threat of violence or the likelihood of violence that was going to happen the next day. We've not seen that. I would like to see that. That would be very interesting. Who were they getting that from? that kind of thing. What were the inputs for FBI information when they were told that there was going to be violence on January 6th? What was the substance of that information? Who'd they get it from? That kind of thing. That could easily come out in a congressional inquiry if the Republicans just had the balls to defend their own people. There's a relevant phrase. It was from this German nationalist, early 20th century writer called "fishing in the Rubicon." It's a wonderful little phrase. To cross the Rubicon, of course, is to become Caesar. It's to do the coup. It's to take power. The fishing in the Rubicon is when you get right up to the river and you drop your little hook and line in the water and pretend, you're playing with power. Everything about January 6th was fishing in the Rubicon. Everything about the 2020 election from the Republican standpoint was sort of this way. I kind of thought at the beginning, if you're going to go all in on this stop the steal stuff, you need to have the ability to prove it. You need to have the ability to make your case. You need to have the poll watchers. You need to have your lawyers in place. All those things that just didn't seem to be done. They wanted the people to turn out in droves, but they weren't doing the work to actually make their case. And so, when people were, doing their Caesarism memes when it came to January 6th, I just, not this Caesar, not this army, I'm afraid. They're not playing a serious game. And when you're the saddest part about that is for a lot of these people who were taken in by it, the consequences are very real. And so it's really just, it's profoundly disillusioning. I think I didn't think much of Trump beforehand, but 2020 was really an embarrassing show.
It's funny to me because actually on January 6th of last year, I tweeted, what are these people doing? They're not going to go in. This is when they were inside. So they're not going to go in and start making laws, right? They're going to wind up with harsh prison sentences. And I had all these leftists, blue checks even, come at me and say, oh, they're going to get off easy. They're white supremacists and the police are white supremacists. So therefore, there's not going to be any kind of repercussions. Just using this really faulty logic. And of course I was right, but I want to compare it to something I witnessed firsthand in the previous election when Donald Trump was inaugurated and the protests that happened around that, the riots. First of all of DC was completely militarized. I wasn't there on January 6th, so I can't compare it one to one, but I can tell you that if the police didn't want you to go in someplace, you weren't going. And so what happened is, at the checkpoints, which let you into the inauguration, they had all these activist groups doing various blockades. So that did dramatically, in my view, that dramatically decreased the turnout. So when the media had all these pictures of the lawn and the whole Washington Monument and that whole area, and showing how empty it was, that was a result of some of the protests that were going on. But more importantly, what happened after that was there was a anti-capitalist march where organizers, and I interviewed them in the lead up to it, told people, don't worry, the police do not do mass arrests in DC. They don't kettle you. Just wear black and a mask, and you can do whatever you want here because there's no danger. And of course, what happened is that they did get kettled. They got surrounded by the police and arrested. And there were about 230 of them. I was in that group. I got pepper sprayed. I got trampled, and I got arrested, spent 25 hours in jail. But it's amazing to me because everyone was let out. I mean, there was a lot of property destruction. And it wasn't just like Starbucks. It was also things like bus stations, which really kind of rubbed me the wrong way because, working class people use bus station. You're against capitalism, yet, you're destroying infrastructure that benefits the working class. But they were let out after 25 hours. And eventually all the charges against 230 people were dropped. The only people that were convicted in plea deals because they took pleas. So compare that to the January 6ers who caused significantly less property damage, who didn't really do anything more than trespass, who are now spending a year in jail, some of whom without violent offenses. And you know, I'm not going to say that there was a lot of political support for the January 20 people, the people that were protesting against Trump, but there's even less support for the January 6ers. Even on the right wing, people are afraid to just say, hey, these guys are political prisoners, and maybe we don't agree with what they're doing, or what they did, but you know, the punishment has to fit the crime. There's not a whole lot of that. So I just want to raise that because, you know, I'm not so sure that there were informants guiding the left-wing protest, and it seems like they were on the right, but in both cases it was kind of monumentally stupid, where it was just like, you know, go in, do what you want, and there's, you know, not going to be any problems. And then when there are problems, they're ditched. You know, there's very little support. So I just wanted to raise that parallel. I don't know if anyone has any thoughts on that.
I mean, to that, I would say that largely the left has been so thoroughly brought into the national security apparatus fold that they don't necessarily need direction anymore. They're doing it on their own. And they're doing a really good job of it. This is something that might be minorly tangential, but if you look at like Herbert Marcuse, who came from the OSS and then sort of became the founder of modern American leftism, there's really short, really straight line between, you know, the intelligence community and what this generation thinks of as leftism.
Gloria Steinem too.
Oh, yes. Those Boots Riley is the person who told me that. That's crazy. They're just all around. But in the emergency stimulus bill that Trump signed just a few days before January 6th, this is something that my co-host and I were like ranting about on the show, just because we couldn't believe that we were going through ridiculous pork in the stimulus package for the $600 that the peasantry was going to take. $188 million was appropriated to the repairing of anything that was damaged, the replacing of anything that was broken, and the repair and maintenance of the Capitol building, interior, exterior, and grounds. Just days before, nearly $200 million was thrown into that stimulus bill. Now, and I'm not necessarily
glad I pay my taxes.
Yeah, I'm not necessarily suggesting that they knew in advance.
A new laptop.
Well, yeah, and AOC new shoes. Don't they also had to get AOC some new shoes. But I mean, it's in terms of property damage and like direct compensation mechanisms for it, one was provided in advance.
Yeah.
Well, one other topic that I think I'd be curious what you all think about it is the suicides of the cops after January 6th.
Yeah,
I find that very interesting, and you know, thinking about why they did it and what January 6th must have what they must have thought about it, or I don't want to. I'm a conservative, and I don't want to get too Jeffersonian about, like, you know, the virtues of watering the tree of liberty every now and then. But every now and again, I don't think it's a bad thing for the government to be put in fear of the people.
They weren't, though. I'm sorry to interrupt, but they weren't. I mean, it was they're playing like they were. The Democrats are doing that. They're exploiting that kind of idea, but they weren't, you know.
Well, at the end of the day, I suppose I believe that having the QAnon shaman standing on the Senate dais of the most powerful country in the world is a powerful symbolic act. And that it's humbling for the United States. It's humbling for the empire. Maybe it's one of the most iconic photos I can think of. And you know, the idea, you know, I feel for those cops, the ones that killed themselves. Like they think that they're guarding, you know, the people's house. They're guarding the representatives of a democratic country, and all of a sudden, here's the demos, and they hate you. That must.
And AOC hates you.
Well, and maybe AOC does too because they're cops. But the idea of like being confronted with the actual demos as opposed to just like the representatives, and it's very different than what you thought it was. I think that's maybe the most undiscussed and powerful part of January 6th. I don't know. What do you all think about that?
Yeah, I thought the suicide cops thing was a little suspicious, not just because like I was kind of wondering why they would do that just from like the events of January 6th did not seem that traumatic to me in the grand scheme of things. And so it seems like more of a political, like it was seen very politically advantageous for the Democrats to highlight that. And that's even in light of like their very anti-police streak this past year. So something just didn't seem right to me. I don't know like what it would have been or what, like I'm not going to try and conspiracy theorize, but it didn't seem.
I guess. I mean, I can see it. I mean, I've talked to cops occasionally, not often, but you know, the idea they have their self-worth and their self-understanding is very closely tied to like the idea that they're the peacekeepers, that they're the ones that are, you know, the guardians.
Thin blue line of defense.
Right. Yeah. And to be shown a kind of a display of maybe ingratitude or just like, we don't like you, you're standing in our way. And these people who are, you know, not a smelly leftist, they're like upstanding right-wing patriots, you know, that are all of a sudden having this big confrontation with cops. I think that could be profoundly, it could confront a cop's self-understanding in pretty profound ways.
Well, it had to be weird for both parties because you know that both parties were under the impression that the other would immediately submit and join them.
Yeah.
And the exact opposite happened. The people who went into the Capitol found out what the police are really there for. The police found out what the people were really about, and it didn't mesh. It didn't. I honestly don't know enough about the individuals who committed suicide to want to comment on that too much, but I agree that it was weaponized. I agree that it was jumped on for very cynical, very partisan purposes. And then again, the mythology around that and around Brian Sicknick, both very, very, very fuzzy, man. How many times did the story around Sicknick change?
I was just going to say that. It bears mentioning how the original story about Sicknick was that he was beaten to death with a fire extinguisher. And that turned out not to be true. There was one, I remember this very well from January 6th. I was kind of following everything as it happened. We sent a reporter down there, and I remember seeing an NPR report that they claimed that he had died and there was a DOJ murder investigation into Sicknick's death. None of that was true. So NPR was putting out this false reporting about Sicknick. When that all went down, they said he had died. He hadn't died yet. And they said that there was a DOJ murder investigation, which as far as I can tell, did not exist. And so who did that? Who told the NPR reporter that? That's one of my other lingering questions about January 6th. Were they trying to basically, you know, put up Sicknick as the other side's martyr?
Yes, they absolutely were, to the point to where they scoured the internet, stole my friend's footage, who had the two guys talking about bear mace or something like that the media jumped on for about 72 hours. There were two guys that they were looking for, they were trying to find in correlation with the death of Officer Sicknick. And it's like the convo couch watermark is giant in the screen that was ripped off by every news station. But they're the people who were standing by him that happened to film when this exchange took place. Turns out that was completely meritless in and of itself, but it became part of the tale of Brian Sicknick in terms of where they were trying to pass the buck to in order to maintain his status as that martyr for, the brave Capitol Police officers who were, just defending their lives and their country against a mob of angry white supremacist insurrectionists.
I want to comment on the suicides. There were 2 suicides. Is that right?
I think that's right. Yeah.
I mean, it strikes me as weird with everything that we know about how like people were basically let in, funneled in. That we have 2 police officers committing suicide in the aftermath, and no police officers blowing the whistle.
It's actually 4. There are actually 4 suicides, not 2. I just looked that up.
Yeah, well, I mean, there you go. 4 suicide. I mean, and I don't want to get conspiratorial. That's a pattern. And I don't want to get too conspiratorial, but 4 suicides and no whistleblowers. You have to wonder, were they suicided? Yeah. Where are the whistleblowers? Where are the people that are coming out and speaking out about anything that went wrong on that day that the government did? It's not happening. I haven't seen that. So it's really you have to wonder. And if you think it's too conspiratorial to ask this question about, maybe people are being killed to send a message and kill that information. Look at Baltimore, like look at how the police operate in Baltimore, and then come back and tell us that that's too conspiratorial to wonder.
Yeah, well, that's what I had been wondering, is whether they were suicided, but I didn't want.
You have to be careful.
To tinfoil hat. Yeah. It seemed very suspicious to me, but like I had to wonder, like, if they were if their job security was at risk because of what happened, or like they were gonna go on, like, be charged with something, like, I don't know.
Well, and they did a massive restructuring of the top bureaucracy around the Capitol Police, and they did a huge shakeup in terms of personnel at a bunch of other levels, and then they gave them extra billions of dollars in branch offices. And that still trips me out, that what we got out of January 6th was federal police offices in Washington, D.C., and then L.A. and New York City, and that there are now federal police who are not accountable to anybody in the jurisdiction and where they operate, who get to maintain grounds in an operational, presence.
That's really a big issue, because the Capitol Police are not subject to the Freedom of Information Act, right. Because they're directly under the control of Congress, and that means that's one of the reasons why we know so little about the Ashley Babbitt shoot. There's nothing we can FOIA, and there were 2 conflicting reports about who actually fired the shot that killed Ashley Babbitt. The Spectator did report in I think it was unbylined. It was for Coburn, which is their anonymous gossip blog. They claimed that it was a Secret Service agent, in which case it would be subject to FOIA. But the preponderance of reporting says that it's a Capitol Police officer.
Yeah. Well, there's a lot of questions that need to be asked. Maybe a handful of people in Congress that are either smart enough or honest enough to ask them. So I wouldn't expect answers in the near future. Maybe some answers will come out in trial. I know that discovery process is extensive here. But at the end of the day, and I'm going to wrap this up, I want to make a little disclosure. I just got $3,900 in a class action lawsuit for being arrested on January 20, 2017, after spending 25 hours in jail. And I just want to say that I hope that the people that have been in jail over January 6th for more than a year now, and for nonviolent offenses, get a settlement that is proportional to what I got, because they deserve it. I'm not going to say that they're good people or people that I would want to hang out with, but the punishment has to fit the crime. And if you're overly punished, you should be compensated. That's just what justice looks like. So whether or not you agree with them politically, personally, or on the facts, we're supposed to be advocates for justice, left or right. It doesn't matter. And I hope that there's justice in this case, and I hope that there's justice against the people who let it happen.
Yeah, it's like at the bare minimum, they could treat it as they would treat it if this was happening in China. Like if China held 700 people in prison for protesting, what would we do? Like it just shows like this peak American exceptionalism from all sides. It's so telling in so many respects.
Any final thoughts?
I
Arthur,
appreciate
Steve.
you having me on. I will say
we appreciate you.
As long as the U.S. is prosecuting and trying to extradite Julian Assange and effectively destroying the free press globally, we're going to see, this period of time right now is ostensibly the last period of time in Western history we get to get accurate information out about things like this, where we won't be subject to all of us Espionage Act charges or Computer Fraud and Abuse Act charges. And so it's vitally important that these conversations take place and that this information gets out, because there's a clock on this. If we don't put a direct stop to the prosecution of Assange.
Yeah, I agree with that. I echo that entirely, with the one caveat that I think one way through this, I'm pretty skeptical of the ability of journalism to get us through this, moment of so much disinformation and whatnot. But the one thing that can is a Congress that's willing to use its investigative powers aggressively. And I would really like to see that. I don't see much sign of it. And the January 6th committee is a perfect example of what shouldn't be happening, because they're not really interested in getting answers. They're not interested in sort of guarding the public interest in all of this. But any kind of using Congress's investigative powers more aggressively is inevitably going to be called McCarthyism, because it is McCarthyism. And I guess this is my right winger, my inner right winger coming out. But I think we kind of just need to get over that. An aggressive investigations from Congress are good, and we should do more of them.
Yeah, I mean, sometimes depends on what's going on, but we might have to. What's that, Mila?
No, it's like everyone's just like silent.
I mean, that assumes the Congress is operating on its own volition and in the interest of the people, and I have yet to see direct evidence of that.
Fair enough. I didn't expect you guys to go for McCarthyism.
All right. Well, Jordan, we appreciate Arthur. We appreciate you. And again, you're writing and editing for Modern Age. Is that correct? What's Modern Age?
Yeah, Modern Age is the oldest journal of conservative thought on the right. It was founded in 1957. Russell Kirk was an editor. I'm very happy to not be in the realm of intrigue and sex scandals and spying and this sort of thing. I'm writing. I just edited an article about Camus and one article about the novels of the First World War. So it's a little bit of a change, and it's way lower stress, and so I like it.
Yeah, the news gets tiring, huh?
It does, and stressful.
Yeah, and Steve, he's with Slow News Day. It's a wonderful podcast. You can find it on YouTube and Rockfin, probably elsewhere as well. Steve, anything else you want to plug?
Yeah, so the group that I organized with on behalf of a free press and Julian Assange just announced that we'll be back in DC on April 11th to mark 3 years since Julian Assange was trafficked from the Ecuadorian embassy and placed into the Guantanamo Bay of the United Kingdom. It just found out about that like yesterday, so I'm gonna plug that. And then no, I just thanks, I appreciate it. Yeah, rockfan.com/slownewsday, slownewsdayshow.com. We're going to start a whole like Mastodon thing, but that's that why? Because why not? Because if we've only got a limited time to ride this out, then saturate every platform with content that isn't funneling people back into a government that wants to kill them.
Yeah. Well, it's 2022. We're all going to catch COVID and we're all going to get banned. So
I'm for it.
Cheers to that. All right, everyone. Thanks for joining us again. Thank you to Arthur and Steve. We'll catch you next week.
Take care, everybody.
Take care.